I'm Judy. I do Nature Walks with Judy, and those are short 1-minute videos about nature, but a lot of what I learn and research I do right here in the Nature Center. So we're gonna take a quick tour and look around and see what animals we can find that you're interested in. So this is our Nature Center. It's a place where if you find really interesting historical treasures as kids, you can bring them up here. We have a whole history window there, but also if you find nature treasures, we have a touch tank outside that helps us understand what we find in the tide pools. And then we have a number of exhibits in here that people can learn from at their own pace with their own families. So over here we have a female diamondback terrapin. See, she's bigger than the male. And these guys they nest here on the island. They come out of the water at our sloping barge ramp and they come look for a soft, shady place to lay their eggs. When they lay eggs, it's 4 to 6, maybe 8 pinkish oblong turtle eggs, and they bury them and they hatch out later in the summer. Sometimes they hatch in the late fall, and those babies will overwinter in that nest. And then they start, like right now, coming out. So maybe we'll see a baby diamondback later today. But her name is Shelly, and she was hatched in captivity, so she can't be released. But she lives here in our Nature Center. Here you go, Shelly. All right, we talked about squirt. Over here we have some horseshoe crabs. These are the coolest. So animals like this, we call living fossils because they've been around for so long. I always get my sleeves wet when I play in the Nature Center. And this is a horseshoe crab. So these are super amazing. They have blue blood because the binder in their blood is copper, not iron like ours. And so it is blue. And there's actually a coagulant in that blood that is so incredibly sensitive to chemical toxins that it's used to test almost all of the pharmaceuticals that we use on a daily basis. And in fact, horseshoe crabs are pretty instrumental in developing the COVID vaccine. Because we are seeing some declines in crab populations, there is some pressure for the pharmaceutical industry to use artificial chemicals that do the same kind of thing as horseshoe crabs. But right now, we have these guys in our Nature Center. See this? In order for them to chew, they have to be walking because they use these feet to move their mouth parts. And when they're walking along the bottom, that's how they eat. And this tail right here is called a telson. It's not going to harm you in any way. There's no sting or anything else attached, but the horseshoe crab uses the telson to turn itself over. So you can see how it's using it for balance, and he's trying to get out of my hands. So he would like to be back in the water with his friends. So he's pushing down on his tail, and when we put him back in the water, you'll be able to see him use that to turn himself upside down. Horseshoe crabs hatch, and they outgrow their shells. So essentially, just like other crabs, they will come out of that shell. See how he uses his telson to swim around? And there may be more. Sometimes they bury themselves in the sand and you can barely see them. So right now there are 3 in there, but I'll bet if we look over here, there's some more that are buried. There should be a total of 5 in this tank. On top of this building, there is an antenna called a Yagi antenna that's part of a Motus tower system. And that antenna can pick up birds that have been outfitted, or butterflies or bees or bats that have been outfitted with a geotransmitter. And they might be flying, it teaches us a lot about migration science, but that tower is upstairs, and within 15 kilometers either direction, if one of those birds flies past the tower, it registers a ping, and we can see where the bird came from. So we know, for example, that in the fall of last year, a common nighthawk left Maryland, came here the next day, and 4 days later showed up at Canopy Lodge in Panama. That's 1,900 miles in 4 days. And the technology behind understanding migration science helps us understand that we want to keep our lights off at night, that we want to have good meaty habitat for the birds to rest in and to feed in to go on that next huge journey. So this is a living research place as well, and we collect data all day long on what's going on in terms of migration science. So this is a yellow-bellied slider baby, and he would have hatched out of his egg in a nest and spent the winter in that nest with his brothers and sisters. And now that we have longer, warmer days, he emerged from the nest and he was rescued out of the road, which is not a safe place for tiny turtles to be, but that is where we found this little tiny guy. So one of the really fun things about the marsh is that it's always changing, and the birds that come through are also always changing. Right now we've got a group of laughing gulls that just came in from the winter, but we also have a number of shorebirds that are, that's the laughing gulls making all that noise. We also have a number of shorebirds that are stocking up, they're resting and feeding, and they're gonna get ready to make a huge journey from here to the Arctic Circle, where they will nest for the summer and return back this way in the fall. So when you see flocks of birds like that, you always wanna let them rest because they're headed somewhere else to nest, or they're trying to store up their own food stores to nest here. So it's always a good idea to let shorebirds rest. And this is a mixed flock that involves yellowlegs and willets and dowitchers and gulls. So out here on the beach, there's always something interesting to find. I just picked up a couple of shells, and every shell has a story. For instance, see how this shell has a perfect white circle in it, a perfect round circle in it? That circle was made by this kind of snail when it was full. It's called a moon snail, and they have a sharp little tongue that will lick and spit and lick and spit and lick and spit, and this clam would be solid. And when they come in, they lick and spit and create that hole, and eventually they can put their stomach juices right inside the clam, suck it dry, and the clam will eventually leave its shell on the beach. So it's sort of like playing nature detective. This is a kind of jingle shell that often has a little, looks like almost like a little tiny footprint inside. This is also a clam, but the other side of this is almost flat, and they're much harder to find. So everywhere you go, pick up things. This is an oyster shell. Oyster shells are a great substrate for other oysters to grow. And everywhere you go, you can find something that tells you a story or a mystery that you want to solve. So anyone can be a naturalist. It doesn't matter how old you are. What is important is that you pay attention to the little details that you see anywhere you go. Look and see if between these leaves, there might be a lizard or a frog hiding, waiting for its next meal. Look through the grasses to see if there's a trail where wild animals have been there or tracks in the grasses. Look in the sky and see if you see movement that changes for birds that are migrating or sitting up. When you hear bird calls, stop and look and see if you can see where it came from. I'm all about sharing nature with you on my website, naturewalkswithjudy.com, or you can always email me questions. I love those. And have fun, get out there and look and see what amazing things are happening right in your own backyard.